We have this little interface. We'd like to add some styling to it now via CSS. So what we're going to need is we're going to need a separate style sheet. So we're going to call this cryptocards.css. And this is where our CSS is going to live, our cascading style sheets. And now we can apply properties to our markup, because right now we have HTML, which is the structure of the page. This is like the skeleton of the page. But now we want to add some dynamic presentation or clothing, fancy clothing to our app. So first of all, we need to create that CSS, and then we need to link it via a link href tag. And we need to put that into the header, and then we can give it a rel attribute and name it a style sheet. And it's a self-closing tag as well. Once that's linked up, there's no effect to the page, but now we can reference the CSS. Could you do it inline? Sure, with a style tag. You could do this inline, but as CSS grows over time, you don't want to have all of it in one file. A good practice is to separate this out, because you could have multiple style sheets. So we're going to grab we're basically going to override the default behavior. So the body selector is the body tag. And by default, it has a little bit of a margin, and we're just going to remove that margin. And you can always use your dev tools, click sources, and your inspector, and you can see the element there, the body tag right there, and you'll see that's what we applied there. And you see we untoggle that, you'll see that there was a little bit of a margin there. So we're just overriding that default behavior. We can mess around here and put a background color as black just to see that we can edit the DOM. It's not as soon as we refresh the page, it's gone. This is kind of like in memory for the lifetime of the window. And there you can inspect the root, and you see our cards there. You can see we have 4 cards. So we can inspect those little elements there. And we can see that each one has a header, and you can see the default browser attributes there. We could go ahead and change this to a different color if we wanted to and see what it looks like. Maybe we want our main header to be blue. Maybe we want it to have a margin bottom, a little bit of spacing. We can change that so that it's two units relative to its main container, and you can see the box model that occurs with CSS. And you can highlight any one of those and see the difference between border, padding, and margin. The margin's on the outside of the border, and the padding's on the inside of the border, and then there's the content itself. So we always need to use our dev tools. So we're going to target that using that H1 using an element selector CSS. So we're going to target all H1s, and we're going to give them a different color. So we can start with some, there's named colors. We can start with some random color here and then use the color picker, which is super nice. Now we can pick whatever color in this little tool that allows us to preview colors. We didn't have that back in the day. We had to use like little swatches and little things on the internet to reference these hex codes, but now you can pick them. Super nice. The only thing to mention is these are global selectors. So if you have a big application, this would change all H1s, right? All header ones. You would give this style to all of them. So that you have to remember that they will all have this color, and they'll all have some spacing on the bottom. 2 rem means 2 units relative to the main root container, which is in fact the body right now. So we're basically applying that instead of a fixed width, like 2 pixels, we're saying 2 units relative to that. So if it's responsive, it'll change, right? So we have a nice little, we have a start of a header. So now we want to target this input box. So we have the input search currency, and we have the select drop down. You can see on the right, it's a little bit narrow. Maybe you want to make it a little bit bigger. So we can actually do multiple selects here. We can say input and select with a comma to say we're selecting both. We're going to give it a width of 250 pixels just to make them a little bit bigger. You can see it live updating on the right there. And we should probably give it a little bit of a bigger height here, perhaps, just to make it a little bit more legible. We'll give 25 pixels just so it's a little bit bigger. Next up, I'm thinking we should probably, perhaps rounding the corner. You can do something called border radius and play with the border. So we can add some other attributes to it. We'll give a little bit of a margin to the bottom because we probably want to push down the results a little bit, and maybe a little bit of some padding on the top. Again, it's 1 unit relative to the top container, so it grows over time. So we're going to say 1 unit space on the top margin, 1 on the bottom. We're going to say 1 on the left. We're going to say 0.5 on the left and 0.5 on the right. We want to add a little bit of spacing between these two because they're sitting side by side. And you can see it applies. Now, this is a little bit, by the way, margin dash. You can see it's pretty repetitive. That's the long way of doing it. I'll show you in a little bit a shorthand way of doing it. So this is basically the long way, but you can actually, you'll see sometimes the shorthand would be just to use margin, and then each attribute will be 1 position. It's kind of like a, if I recall, it's top left, bottom right, I believe it is. So each position here in the margin tag will correspond to what we did in the bottom. And either one is right. It's just sometimes you'll see that in CSS, a lot of shorthand. So we're just playing around with it again because I forget. So I think it's, like I said, top left, bottom right. I always have to look it up sometimes because I forget. Just to validate, always look at the docs to make sure, as you're developing, that's exactly what it is: top left, bottom right. But to be honest, sometimes I need to check because I don't memorize all this stuff, right? I always keep the docs handy and always reference back. And if you hover over it too, it should give you the IntelliSense, should help you out. So we could apply some other attributes here. We have some spacing here is what I wanted. And then, maybe we'll put a border. And again, the border can be shorthand as well. We can, if you hover over, you'll see the default styles there. If you inspect a little lower, you'll see it, but we can mess around here and just play with the border, right? We can say there's no border, and you'll see the border will go away. We can change the color of it to red or blue, make it thicker, make it have a drop shadow. We can give it we could say, oh, here's some box shadow. Actually, here's a box shadow, and give it a little bit of a little bit of a 10 pixel kind of shadow, I guess. And then you can say there's no border to it, just a shadow. You could mess around with the size of the border as well. Again, we're just playing around, and we're playing around in the dev tools just to give a little preview. Whatever you find your style works like here, whatever you like, you can go and backtrack this to your style sheet itself. This is just in memory, and this is just messing around with the DOM in real time. But like I said, this is not persisting. This is just kind of giving a preview. Like if we want to change around the edges a little bit of that border, you can give it a border radius. You can see the currency has changed a little bit, 5 pixel radius. You can play with it. You can put up to 50 and see what it looks like. But we have a bit of a style that we like, and most likely we just copy paste it, but I need this part here. We can get rid of that selector because that's from the DOM. So we have a border shadow, 0, 0, 10 pixels. We have a border of none, and we have an outline of none, and a border radius of 5 pixels. That's kind of what I came up with, but again, this is just kind of an initial attempt. The whole thing is playing with it. If you think something looks better, maybe more bigger or without a shadow, that's your design. This is just showing you how to kind of manipulate these elements with a CSS selector. And usually you put CSS element selectors at the top because they're very general, and then you build specific classes as you go. So we're going to add an attribute here to this called. Actually, I think this is in the wrong place because this is on the card itself. We might have to do a little bit of magic here soon and put an app, an extra div around everything. But for now, we'll start with this. We're going to have a div. Ideally, our main app div is going to be the container. So we're going to have to center everything in the middle of the page. So we would like to have a container that contains all of the cards, and we'd like to be able to control that container as we go. So you'll see maybe a little bit of tweaking here. We might actually, like, we have the root div, which is the whole, is encapsulating everything. So there would probably be where we put this new class called this new style called app. So that's the container. We could target it by the ID root, but for now we'll create an app, just a class selector called app, and then we control all the fonts. So we're basically saying that any of the cards are going to have this specific font. You can see it change. We want it all to be Arial, sans serif. So that's basically all the cards, all the data will now inherit this. We can do it one time here. We're going to add a background. Maybe we're going to add the background a little bit, I don't know, like a little, whatever. You can make it a dark theme, but we'll just add a little bit of a kind of a white smoke, and then ideally the card itself will be a little bit lighter, so you'll be able to see the card pop out a little bit. But like I said, you can create a dark theme, put it all black, and then have different color scheme if you want. Some padding, again, this is kind of responsive design by having, instead of fixed padding, we'll have 2 units relative to its parent element, rem, relative to the parent element. So as the page grows, the spacing grows as well relative to it. So that's actually responsive because you're going to be dealing with different viewports. You can see here the padding. You can see the center aligned now. Everything's aligned. It's in the center. It's not left aligned. It's nicely laid out, more or less, for mobile. But in desktop, we're going to want this to be a little bit more responsive. In the next video, we'll do that. So we have it cleaned up a little bit, but perhaps maybe we want to add a little bit of a margin or a little bit of a border to each one of these cards. So I'm just highlighting a specific card. We're going to put a little bit of spacing between the top card with margin top. And then we're probably going to justify the content is centering the content. More on that later. That actually comes as part of responsive design, but I added that in there. And the margin top is there, so everything has spacing beside it. So I kind of like that. But we're going to want to eventually go to these divs and add a class element to them. That is for the card item themselves. And we're going to want to put you can see they're all the same, right? They have the same structure. We're going to want to go ahead and put a class element on each one of those. Put a little bit of spacing here from our main control here. Actually, this was the part here, I think, where we want to add a container. Okay, this is what I was thinking about. We should really add a container here. We have an app class for the whole, we have a class for the whole app, but I would like the container to be, we want to control that container in case we want to make it responsive. So right now I'm going to do a little bit of tweaking here and create that container and then that div container, and we're going to cut and copy paste or cut and reapply here. So we have one container element, and that gives us the ability to add some responsive design via Flexbox in the next video. That's why we're doing it, because the Flexbox will control the alignment, whether it's horizontal or vertical, for our desktop or mobile. So that's great. We got the container there. We can target the container. We're going to say crypto container, and we're just going to create this, and we're going to build on top of this. So that class is there. It can remain empty for now if we wanted to, but we're gonna put in the justify content center, and then we're probably gonna let's see what we're gonna do here. We're gonna add a little bit of a margin top here just to kind of separate it from the search panel and the container itself. So we had a little bit of a gap there on the right, just a little bit, so it's not touching. And we have the basis now to build a responsive design here, which is really great. In just a minute, so we can see we can resize it. But the problem is we want it to be horizontally it needs to go horizontally across for desktop, not just vertical. So we need to make this responsive now. And we need to make it look good on desktop, mobile, as well as tablet.